All right, let's get this meeting to order. Ask Director Barnes to lead us to the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the June 11th, 2015 meeting of the Board of Directors of Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District. The Metro Cable announcement, the open session meeting is videotaped for cablecast on Metro 14, replay on Saturday, June 13, 2015 at 12 noon, and Monday, June 15 at 6 p.m. on Channel 14. Webcast is at www.sacmetrocable.tv. The open session meetings are also available for viewing on the district website at www.metrofire.ca.gov. Now is the time for public opportunities to discuss matters of public interest within the jurisdiction, including items on or not on the agenda. And do we have any speakers, Madam Clerk?
There are no speakers this evening.
Wonderful. Next up is the consent calendar. Do we have any questions on that?
Mr. Chairman, if it pleases the board, I would move approval of the consent agenda.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Can we get a roll, please?
Director Monk?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Barnes?
Aye.
And Wood?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Next up, action items. Number 1, disclosure of a material expenditure regarding excess workers' compensation insurance. Chief Holbrook, that is yours.
Thank you, members of the board. My name is Chris Holbrook, Deputy Chief of Administration for the district. Tonight we have 2 items for you, action item 1 and action item 2. Both are in excess of $100,000, so they are brought before you instead of being on consent. With that, I'm going to introduce Brad Svennington from Wells Fargo. He is our broker for insurance, and he will go through the action items for you.
Hey, Brad. Welcome back. Thanks for having me. Brad Svennington, Wells Fargo Insurance, tough last name. You can call me Brad. Excess workers' comp, very competitive renewal. Your current carrier came in 1.5% over what they were at last year. We had a more competitive quote with New York Magic, that's New York Marine and General Insurance Company. However, they have a couple of provisions that make them a little less attractive. If you have any questions about that, I'd be more than happy to go in depth. So 1.5% increase over last year, and I believe last year we were looking at 8 or 9% increase, so we've managed to keep that a little more in line.
Any questions on this action item?
I do, if you don't, Mr. Chair. Brad, thank you for coming. The only question I have is I see obviously there's a difference between 145,000. Being new to this, is it because of the statutory versus the $50,000 limit as far as statutory is no set limit?
Yeah, well, yeah. There's a couple of provisions. One is they're putting a cap on communicable disease. If 2 or 3 or 4 firefighters are injured at a scene because of that hepatitis or what it may be, they're going to cap that at $50 million. Seems like an awful lot of money, but your current carrier is Infinity, so that 144,000 or whatever may seem not so much.
Right. I agree. And I was misspoke. It is 50 million, not 50,000. So
Yeah,
that is a large number, but yes, I agree with you.
It is. And your current carrier has a better occurrence, what is considered an occurrence, which mean it may be a 20-day fire.
Okay.
That's an occurrence, whereas New York Magic is going to consider that a 24-hour period, and then you roll over, you have another $3 million deductible or retention.
Okay.
So.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I get a motion on this
Yes,
action item?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve staff's recommendation and award Safety National, our current carrier, our excess workman's compensation policy.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Director Monk?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Barnes?
Aye.
And Wood?
Aye.
Motion passes.
And Chief Holbrook, and you guys got number 2?
Item number 2 is your we consider in the industry your package program. It's your general liability, auto liability, employment practices. That's the basis of the package. We did have a couple other quotes. However, SDRMA, your current carrier, it's pretty much a flat renewal. If I dissect it, it's probably 2,000 less than last year. We have more vehicles, more equipment, more property. It was a very good renewal. The only thing they did do is they increased your deductible, your comp and collision deductible from 3,000 to 5,000 to maybe give you an incentive not to have them. But I know it's reality.
Okay, do we have any questions on this action item?
Mr. Chairman, I would move staff's recommendation and award our our commercial insurance to SDRMA.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Director Monk?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Barnes?
Aye.
And Wood?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Next up, we'll call Amanda Thomas. I guess this is your item. The fiscal year 2015-16 and 2016-17 preliminary budgets. The floor is yours.
Good evening, directors. I was going to start tonight, just kind of leading off this discussion. I would like to acknowledge the finance staff that's in the front rows over there. Done a tremendous amount of work, and Amanda has really led the charge through this budget process. A little background on our budget process. Of course, essentially our goal as the fire department is we want to maximize every amount of service that we possibly can based on the available resources. And this particular year, moving into a preliminary budget, we found that to be challenging again, as it has been in the last 5 or 6 years based on the economic downturn. That being said, the budget officers got together in this very room and worked very diligently on several different meetings, and we started off with a position of trying to rewrite the ship, as it were, as to what you might need and want a little bit in there, some weeds I call them, and then we actually ended up having to fight down into the bone again in some cases to get about $20 million back into to essentially a balanced budget. So a little prelude to that. So tonight we are looking at a 2-year preliminary budget that has been developed and presented here tonight. It's expected the 2-year impact based on what our current projected revenues and expenditure needs will be. So tonight we'll be recommending the adoption of the 15-16 preliminary budget. And then the 16-17 budget is presented tonight for information purposes, downrange, giving a snapshot of what next year will look like based on some projections from this year and some also some issues that even in this year's budget, if we didn't take care of them, they'll be kicked into next year. And then the preliminary budget, as we all know, is just a starting point that we will continue to refine as we move forward into the final budget process in the early fall. Despite our projected growth in property tax this year, the impact of us not having our SAFER grant funding for 2 truck companies and lower medic revenues that will be discussed later, combined with the need for different pieces of equipment to be replaced and facility repairs, roofs, ramps, that type of thing, they've all presented funding challenges to maintain the existing levels of service we have today. So as an offset to some of those issues, to make sure that we're coming in with a fiscally responsible preliminary budget based on the most service we can provide, we are anticipating converting a truck to an engine. That'd be 26. One of the trucks was 26 was covered by the SAFER grant. We're proposing moving that back to an engine starting July 1st. And then the other SAFER truck, we want to continue to fund it as long as possible. And we're looking at that point to continue to fund it up until approximately October, where we can get a better look on it. And then on about October 1st, we also want to open up engine 106 that has been closed. We were running truck 106 out there as a single resource out of that station instead of having an engine truck combo, which is a better public safety model to deliver service. And we used that October date to allow these other numbers to be synthesized as we go into the final budget. And then we can have more information to decide if that date can be extended, et cetera. So for now, those are the preliminary dates. This budget also reflects our plan that we're going to be doing a massive amount of hiring next year. 2 fire academies that will result in backfilling vacant firefighter positions we have today, as well as covering the expected retirements that will retire in the next fiscal year. We're recommending the recommended position additions that are only essential to our district's ability to provide our mission, and that'll include 2 new day staff captains, new positions, and then a safety captain coming back in where we had a transition of a safety specialist that'll be moving on in her career advancement, and that position would be open. And so we're advocating we want a fire captain to come back in there to be able to operate as our safety captain. Also, internal, not necessarily new personnel, but different capabilities of a specialist in HR and a specialist in payroll to go from a specialist to an analyst to provide more in-depth data analysis and function in their positions. And of course, anytime we touch the position authorization document in the final budget, it'll be obviously discussed with labor, meet and confer. And so we have those discussions planned moving forward. Or we plan to have those discussions. There's nothing on the books right now, but we have discussed it with labor verbally. Also, the budget includes full funding of the OPEB annual required contribution, and that's $14.2 million. It is compared to last year's final budget, it's a $1.1 million increase, but you have to remember part of that was we had underfunded the ARC last year, and we finally finished that by resolution this last April. And so it's essentially a $400,000 increase, which was pre-anticipated in the ARC that was done a couple years ago for this year. And so overall, the budget is going to be essentially balanced, but preliminary, that shows a $400,000 net deficit. And quite frankly, $400,000 is a lot of money. And when people would say, well, that sounds like a big number to be essentially balanced, if you think about our budget, it represents less than 0.5% of what our total budget is. So yes, it's a big number, but in relative comparison to a $187 million budget, it's a pretty small number. So, and we will continue to hone that number in as we move forward. And also, this will be offset with carryover, which we believe, and that those numbers are being finalized this month, of the 14-15 budget that we expect to have an offset of a rollover in that based on overall, that'll be a negative impact to the reserves as we carry that over. So looking ahead in the 16-17 year, we would assume that additional expense reductions will need to be made in the next year in order to have a balanced budget. We have, in fact, different equipment needs that we have kicked down the road. We have things such as P25, which is a communications issue. We have self-contained breathing apparatus and other liabilities that we know. And we're hoping in that projection for the second year, we used a very conservative estimate on projections on growth, but those are recognized industry standards. So at this point, I will kick it over to Amanda Thomas, who has really the brains and the technical information to explain this further.
Good evening, directors. Amanda Thomas, Chief Financial Officer. I actually would like to start off just by echoing Chief Wells' comments about thanking the staff. I'm up here as the spokesperson tonight, but really most of the work that went into putting this budget together was done by other people. And so I'd like to recognize the division leaders and the budget officers, as well as the finance staff that put a lot of work and effort into this, and without them it would not be possible. Okay, so starting off the discussion on the preliminary budget, the chart on this slide really shows you a summary of the general fund budget for 2015-16 and compares that to the current 2014-15 budget based on the mid-year budget. We are, in fact, projecting a deficit in the general fund for 15-16 of approximately $400,000. But as Chief Wells mentioned, we're expecting that although when you look at that mid-year 14-15 column, you see a 0 at the bottom, that's based on budget. We expect based on actual results that there will be a surplus in 14-15. We can't really quantify exactly what that number is at this point, but we think it will be more than sufficient to offset the $400,000 approximate deficit in 15-16 so that we wouldn't have an overall net negative impact to the reserve. The one other thing that I wanted to point out before we leave this chart is that you'll see, if you look at that line labeled capital assets, which is right above total expenditures, we changed the way that we're budgeting for capital assets in fiscal 15-16. So historically, capital assets had been, certain capital assets have been budgeted in the general fund. We're no longer doing that. So all capital purchases are being budgeted in the capital facilities fund. And the way that those are being funded is through a transfer from the general fund. So you'll see that if you look down on the right-hand column, the transfer out to Fund D, in the middle column there, about $3.1 million. And that's reflective of the capital expenditures that are funded in the Capital Facilities Fund with revenue from the general fund. Before we get into the specifics on the revenue projections for 15-16, I thought it would be interesting to look at the revenue history, and this is a chart that many of you have probably seen before. What's interesting about it is that it not only shows the decline in property tax revenues that was experienced, as well as the relatively slow rebuilding of those revenues over time, but it's also shown, that the district really has been able to diversify revenues over time. So that property taxes account for a smaller share of overall revenues. If you look in 2008-9, that property tax figure of $128 million coincidentally is about what we're projecting for fiscal 16-17 now. But in 2008-9, that represented 80% of total revenues. In 16-17, that would represent 70% of total revenues. So we've seen a shift there over time. This pie chart shows the distribution of revenues projected for fiscal 2015-16. So again, following on the comment that I just made on the previous graph, you can see that property taxes represent about 2/3 of projected revenues for 15-16. And then the second largest revenue source is medic cost recovery, and that includes the ambulance billings as well as the revenues from the GEMT and the IGT programs. So that's kind of an all-encompassing number there, and that's about 27% of total revenues. Overall, for the general fund in fiscal 15-16, we're projecting total revenues of $187 million. That is a net increase of $1.8 million compared to the current year. So making up that increase or the change from this year to what we're projecting next year, we are projecting a $5.6 million increase in property taxes. That's about a 4.7% increase. That number is developed based on extensive analysis by HDL, who is the district's property tax consultant, they do a lot of work to come up with that number, and historically have been pretty close. I mentioned in an earlier presentation to the Finance Committee that we're trending a little bit below this year. We think a lot of that is due to some refund activity, and we'll analyze what impact that may have for future years. But at this point, it's not impacting the preliminary budget number. Moving down the list, medic cost recovery, we're actually projecting a $1.2 million decrease in that revenue item for 15-16. That's based on our experience so far this year, and really what we've seen is that while call volume is increasing, our revenue per call is decreasing. And we think that that's because of a trend in the shift in payer mix, where a larger proportion of the calls are being covered by Medi-Cal, which represents the lowest reimbursement rate. So we've seen that sort of deteriorate revenues even though we've had more activity. So based on the experience that we've seen so far this year and expecting that that trend will continue into next year, we are projecting a decrease for those revenues. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that the 15-16 revenue budget does include 1.2 million of what should be considered one-time revenues for prior year GEMT reimbursements. There were reimbursements for fiscal year 9-10 and fiscal year 10-11 that have been held up due to a federal audit. This is really unrelated to the GEMT program, so there isn't any reason to expect that we won't get that money. The timing of it, though, is uncertain. So you may recall that originally was included in the budget for this year. At mid-year, when it didn't look as if we would get it during this fiscal year, it was pulled out. Well, we're putting it back in next year because we believe it's reasonable to assume that it would be received sometime during the next fiscal year. The other differences in revenue relative to 14-15 are in the 14-15 budget, we've included revenue of $1.3 million for financing proceeds, as well as deployment reimbursements of $2.5 million. So those are not included in the 15-16 budget. They do have offsetting expenditure reductions as well. So when you look at the net increase after adjusting for those items with offsetting expenditure reductions, we're looking at a net increase of $5.6 million. But again, just to point out that $1.2 million of that is that one-time GEMT. And I didn't mention intergovernmental transfer or IGT. We're assuming that revenue source would remain flat year to year, so it is included in the budget, but it's not contributing to an increase or a decrease. Before I moved into a discussion of expenditures, I thought this was an interesting chart to look at because it really points out that the underlying demand for services has continued to increase despite the fact that revenues have been slow to recover. So when you look at call volume from 2005 to what's being projected for 2015, it represents a 43% increase. So that's obviously putting pressure on the expenditure side of things that the revenue side of things isn't keeping up with. So this pie chart represents the breakdown of expenditures for the 15-16 preliminary budget. You can see that labor accounts for 80.6% of total budgeted expenditures in the general fund for fiscal 15-16. Services and supplies, the next largest category, accounts for 17.5%. I did want to point out that there was actually a typo in the binder. This is the correct percentage here. It's 17.5%, and it includes the $10.5 million that's budgeted as a transfer for the intergovernmental transfer program. So that's included here as an expense, and then we have the revenue that comes in to offset that expense and then provide for that net approximately $6.5 million of revenue. And then the third and final category of expenses is that taxes, licenses, assessments, and contributions, which accounts for just under 2% of total expenses. So moving on to talk about each of those categories, and I'll start off with labor, which represents the largest overall share of expenditures. Total labor budget for fiscal 2015-16 is $148 million, which represents a $2.2 million increase compared to the current year budget. So some of the changes that are reflected in the budget relative to this year that contribute to that increase are, as Chief Wells mentioned, we're planning for 2 firefighter academies next year, so the cost of paying salaries and benefits for those recruits as well as paying for the instructors adds about $4 million to the budget. Filling vacant positions filling the vacant firefighter positions adds $3 million to the budget. Opening engine 106, again, that's effective October 1st, so that's not a full year number, but effective October 1st contributes $1.2 million. But then these additional costs are offset by a reduction in constant staffing overtime of $9.6 million. And that's really driven in large part by filling those vacant positions. So we're reducing the need for that constant staffing overtime. The next impact is as a result of the SAFER funding expiring. So overall, given that that was $2.4 million in funding that won't be available next year, but has been sort of the impact of that has been mitigated by the conversion of the truck to an engine, as well as the assumed closure of the truck effective October 1st. The net impact of that is a $700,000 increase. The new positions that Chief Wells mentioned contribute about $600,000 in net increase to the budget. And then additionally, we are planning for a conversion of single role paramedics from hourly to salary positions. That adds about $100,000 to the budget, but it's really being done to result in administrative efficiencies. It's going to eliminate a lot of the need for manual processing of time that happens today. So we think that that's a wise investment to make.
Let me just add one thing real quickly, too. On the new positions, I missed one earlier. We also have a proposed new deputy fire marshal position, and that's really a kind of a lifeblood on the business side of the organization is in terms of community risk reduction. So I missed that, and I want to make sure I had that clarified. Also, when we talk about engines, and I know we don't really talk about grants unless we have them, and we have some out. And so the only one I want to illuminate a little bit is we do have a SAFER grant application out for an engine. It is our intent at some point, literally after 106, the next engine is 68. And I want to keep that on the long-term radar here about, it's not reflected in any of the documents for tonight because it's not known whether we'd have any funding or not. But I would tell you as a priority of when I talk about increasing service to the community based on resources, that is a high priority for us.
So we also have some additional impacts to the labor budget that are really unrelated to any staffing changes and largely outside of the control of the district. One of those is that there's a $1.1 million budget increase for OPEB, but I want to point out that that's primarily related to the fact that in 14-15 we didn't budget for the full ARC, so we are budgeting for the full ARC going forward, and that's the biggest driver in contributing to that increase. There is also an increase in the actuarial valuation of the ARC from year to year, but the biggest component of that is that it wasn't fully budgeted this year. Additionally, there's a $1 million increase for retirement due to higher retirement rates. So this isn't as a result of new positions. It's simply due to the higher cost for retirement. The pension bond debt service is contributing to about a $900,000 increase. That's actually largely due to the fact that there was an overpayment in fiscal year 13-14 that reduced what needed to be paid in 14-15. And so we no longer have that reduction going into 15-16 when we're kind of at the stable level. And that's primarily what's contributing to that increase. Additionally, there's a $600,000 increase related to sick leave buyback. This is really, the estimate of that is based on our historical experience of that expenditure item as well as some anticipated retirements. So, we feel comfortable that that's an appropriate number to budget for going forward. In fact, I think that the budget for this year may have been a little bit low in that line item. We're also looking at a $500,000 increase for medical premiums just based on estimated premium increases. So again, not because of additional employees, but just escalating cost of providing that benefit. And then finally, there's a $1.2 million reduction in 15-16 relative to 14-15 because we had budgeted for $1.2 million related to the FLSA settlement in 14-15, and that has been fully paid out. So there's no budget for that item in 15-16. The other thing that I wanted to mention, not on this slide, that results in a difference from 14-15 to 15-16 is that in the 14-15 mid-year budget, I mentioned this on the revenue side, we budgeted for deployments, so there was about $2 million of deployment labor expense in the 14-15 budget. That's not included in 15-16 preliminary because typically the practice is we don't include that in preliminary, but we come back and add it back at mid-year based on actual activity. So that sort of wrapped up the labor discussion. Next, moving on to services and supplies. The total services and supplies budget for 2015-16 is $32.1 million. That actually represents a $1.6 million reduction compared to the current year. $2.5 million, there's a decrease of $2.5 million related to one-time expenditures that were included in 14-15, the largest of those being the helicopter maintenance and then some laptops for both EPCR and inspections. So that one-time expense comes out of $2.5 million, and it's offset, partially by increases for some of the other items listed here. So the fire academies, turnouts, employee medicals, medic supplies, and building maintenance. Moving on to the final expenditure category, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the smallest category. Debt service assessments and contributions budget totals $3.6 million for 2015-16. The largest component of that is $1.8 million assessment that's paid to the county for property tax administration. That's a pretty stable amount, but that represents the bulk of that category. But the category also includes debt service payments that are made from the general fund, and those are budgeted to total $1.3 million in 2015-16. $800,000 for the lease revenue bonds, $300,000 for IT equipment financing, and then there's about $200,000 for the Stryker Gurney subscription, and that actually represents the biggest change from 14-15 into 15-16. So in addition to the expenditures, we are also budgeting for transfers from the general fund, as I mentioned earlier. So net transfers from the general fund total $3.1 million. Really, most of this relates to the transfer to the Capital Facilities Fund to fund capital expenditures and debt service. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Capital Facilities Fund a bit later. But I did also want to point out that there are some very minor amounts that are being transferred to other funds, and this is really the result of the county having misallocated interest earnings and now needing that money to be paid back, and there's no other funding in these funds now, so we need to transfer money from the general fund. You'll be adopting resolutions related to these funds tonight if you approve the recommendation, so I wanted you to understand what that was for, and they're listed out here on this slide. And then finally, there's a $40,000 transfer in from reserves, and that's related to prior year deferred compensation program revenue that's going to offset expenses associated with that program. So when you see that $40,000, that's what that represents. So moving on to the 2016-17 budget for the general fund, as mentioned earlier, while we're not recommending that the 2016-17 budget be adopted tonight, we did think it was important to present it for informational purposes. It really does help to demonstrate what the impact of deferring expenditures that cannot be accommodated in 2015-16 is. You can see if you look down, at the bottom middle column there, overall, we're projecting a $3 million deficit in the general fund for 2016-17. And, that really, in part, it does reflect what are relatively conservative revenue projections. So It includes a projection of 2% growth in secured property taxes relative to the 15-16 budgeted amount. That's a conservative projection, pretty typical for kind of future year look where you don't have the data available to do the in-depth analysis that was done when we developed the projection for 15-16. Obviously, as we move forward and get better data and better information, that number will be refined. The other thing that I wanted to point out in terms of the conservative nature of the projections is that we're not including some identified but really potentially some identified potential but uncertain sources of revenue, such as there's some Citrus Heights redevelopment money that's currently the subject of litigation. That may, depending on how that plays out, that may be something that we feel comfortable at a later date recommending we include as a projected revenue, but is not included in the 16-17 revenue projections at this point. We do, looking to 16-17, see a decrease relative to the 15-16 budget because of that $1.2 million in prior year GEMT that I mentioned was one time, so it goes away in 16-17. And then on the increase side, we're showing an additional $3.4 million of revenues in 16-17 related to financing the P25 radio purchases. So there's an offsetting expenditure for that. In terms of expenditures, the labor budget for fiscal 16-17 reflects really the reduced cost for constant staffing overtime as we start to realize the full benefit of having filled those vacant line positions. So we're seeing that cost come down even more in 16-17, and that is partially offset by increases that we're expecting in both retirement and medical. The services and supplies budget shows a substantial increase of $7 million, and that is largely due to one-time, some of those large one-time purchases that we talked about, so the P25 radios as well as the SCBA replacements. And then finally, we're budgeting for a $5 million transfer to the Capital Facilities Fund to fund capital expenditures and debt service. So this slide shows the budget for the Capital Facilities Fund for both years and also compared to this current year. You can see if you look at the line labeled revenue less expenditures, that's really showing the amount that's needed to come in as a transfer to that fund. You can see in fiscal year 2015-16, that's about $3.5 million. As I mentioned earlier, about $3.1 million of that is budgeted to come from the general fund, and then we're also showing a transfer in from the leased properties fund of about $400,000 to make up that difference. In fiscal year 16-17, there's about a $5 million requirement that's all being shown to come from the general fund. In terms of what's contributing to that budget in the Capital Facilities Fund, for fiscal 15-16, we're budgeting for $11 million of capital outlay, of which we're assuming that $10 million will be financed. So that reduces the amount that's required to transfer in because we have that $10 million coming as a financing revenue source. The largest item is a planned burn tower at the Zinfandel training site. So that's budgeted at a cost of $7 million, but we're assuming that that's getting financed over 20 years. The actual impact to 2015-16 is about $250,000 in debt service, which represents half a year of debt service, and then going forward, it would be about $500,000 in debt service. The other large capital outlay items that are included in 2015-16 include $1.2 million for heavy rescue, $1 million for 5 Type 3 ambulances, and then $400,000 for station alerting upgrade. Additionally, there's $2.6 million of debt service budgeted in the Capital Facilities Fund for 2015-16. Looking forward to 2016-17, we're budgeting for $9.3 million of capital outlay, and $7.9 million of that we're assuming would be financed. And then in addition, there's a $3.5 million debt service requirement going into 16-17. So you can see that increase from 15-16 in debt service as a result of the items that were financed in 15-16. That actually wrapped up the discussion of the general fund and the capital facilities fund. Then moving on to the grant fund, this chart shows the budget for both 15-16, 16-17 compared to 2014-15. As I think was mentioned earlier, we only budget for approved grants, so that's what you're seeing here in fiscal 2015-16. Approximately $210,000 of expenditures related to approved grant funding. We do have grant applications in outstanding as grant awards are made, and as we move forward into final budget and mid-year budget, those amounts will get reflected going forward. And then the last fund that I'll discuss tonight is the leased properties fund. This fund captures the revenues and expenditures associated with the leased properties. As you can see here, we are projecting a surplus in each of 2015-16 and 2016-17. As I mentioned earlier, in 2015-16, we're budgeting for that surplus actually to get transferred into the capital facilities fund to help offset the cost of capital expenditures. And that reduces the amount that needs to come from the general fund next year. So that really wraps up the discussion of each of the funds. And in summary, I just like to say that again, while we're only recommending adoption of the 15-16 budget, we do think it's important to do that second year look ahead to 2016-17. It really does help to kind of capture the impact of some of the decisions that are made to defer expenditures. Some of the large-scale mandated purchases that we have, like the P25 and the SCBAs, and really other capital and maintenance needs can't be deferred indefinitely. So, we need to keep that in mind as we move year to year. We will continue to refine our revenue projections as we get more information, but it is important to note that without an improving revenue picture based on what we're looking at for 15-16, we would need to explore further expenditure reductions so that we wouldn't be further deteriorating our reserves. And with that, the recommendation is for adoption of the preliminary budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2016. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Do we have any questions for CFO Thomas?
No. I don't know.
A lot of information.
Very good job, thank you. Welcome to Sac Metro. You present the budget in one of your first meetings, thanks. We need to take each of the resolutions one at a time, so if I can get a motion on 3A.
Mr. Chairman, if it would please the group, I will make a motion to approve general fund resolution preliminary budget for general operating fund 212A.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Director Monk?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Barnes?
Aye.
And Wood?
Aye.
Motion passes.
And can we get a motion on item number 3B?
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval of the resolution for the 2015-2016 preliminary budget for the Capital Facilities Fund 212D.
I second it.
Got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Director Monk?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Kelly?
Aye.
Barnes?
Aye.
And Wood?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Can I get a motion on item 3C, please?
Mr. Chairman, I would move items 3C, the resolution for the 2015-2016 preliminary budget for the Pension Obligation Bonds Fund 212E.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second. Can I get a A roll, please, Madam Clerk.
Dr. Monk.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Kelly.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
And Wood.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Can I get a
Mr.
motion for
Chairman,
item
if it
3D?
would please the group, I would approve, or I would move for approval, Resolution D, the 2015-2016 preliminary budget for other post-employment benefits fund 212F.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second for 3D. Can I get a roll call, please?
Dr. Monk.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Kelly.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
And Wood.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Can I get a motion on item 3E, please?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt resolution for 2016, 15-16 preliminary budget for the grants fund, 212G.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Dr. Monk.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Kelly.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
And Wood.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Can I get a motion on item 3F?
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the resolution 2015, so it'll be F, 2015-16 preliminary budget for the Development Impact Fees Fund, I think it's 212I, if I'm correct.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second. Can I get a roll call, please?
Dr. Monk.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Kelly.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
And Wood.
Aye.
Motion passes.
I got a motion on item 3G, please.
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the resolution G, which is 2015-16 preliminary budget for the Leased Properties Fund, 212L.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, can we get the roll call, please?
Dr. Monk.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Kelly.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
And Wood.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Finally, item 3H.
Mr. Chair, I move that we adopt the resolution H, 2015-16 preliminary budget for the Simulator Grant Funds, 212S.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Dr. Monk.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Kelly.
Aye.
Barnes.
Aye.
And Wood.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Outstanding. Thank you again,
Thank
Ms.
you for your.
Thomas. Moving on into the President's Report, Chief. I appreciate the time you took to mention 68, with all the work and all the construction going on in Southeast Rancho. That's a bigger concern to more and more of our citizens, so thanks for keeping that on your radar. Moving into your report.
Okay. Well, just to bring you up to speed on the IGT, the intergovernment transfer, as you're aware, we actually put all the money out, as we talked about in last year's budget, and it was a new program, and I know there was a lot of board support and a lot of discussion that went into that, and I just want to tell the board tonight that we have received all the money so far except for $3 million that was mailed on the 11th, tonight, I guess, today. So it is in the mail for the last $3 million of the $17 million total, with a net of $6.6 million coming out of that program. So good news, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into that in the last year. Moving into, had a great community service event out at the Antelope Summerfest last weekend. As always, Michelle Idem does a fantastic job out there with our crews. The reserves went out there and really knocked it out of the park. And the gentleman, Rick Walker, one of our single roles that runs the hands-only CPR, and his group was out there. Had over 2,000 people in attendance, and fantastic opportunity for us to be out in the public, and really represented us well, our crews did, so thank you for that. Had a very productive 2x2 meeting yesterday with Rancho Cordova, the city of Rancho Cordova, talked about a lot of the issues that are of interest of both of us, from plan check to fire station 61 on the boulevard, the drought, and other issues that are pertinent to the community. I'd like to thank Chief Taylor and Chief Ellis. They attended the Consumnes firefighter graduation last night. They had a group of new employees coming online, so good for them. I attended today the League of Cities Public Safety Policy Committee. A lot of interesting legislation going on up and down the state as it relates to everything from homelessness to medical marijuana to all sorts of different issues up and down the state as they affect public safety. Continue to have discussions with Local 522 Vice President Ty Bailey. Again, we have an August 26th town hall meeting that'll be out at Station 50 at 10 o'clock in the morning. That's again August 26th on the A shift. and another one in November that we'll talk about at another time. Again, I'll be on KFPK next Thursday, the 18th, 7:40 a.m. Good conversations on that about local issues. I think they're talking a lot about drought and fire danger, and as it relates to the 4th of July coming up. Tomorrow night, it's a great pleasure of all of us to honor our 25 firefighter-paramedic recruits that have graduated from our academy. I can tell you that's a very long process and a very good group of people. I really thank our training staff and everybody else that goes into hiring them. A bit of a success story out of the 25 that are graduating. 15 of them were single roles that started the program, and 15 single roles are graduating out of that program of the 25. I can tell you we started that process to transition people into the fire service, and that is working. This Saturday, through the 14th, the 12th through the 14th, there'll be the Orangevale Fire Muster at Casa Robles High School in Orangevale Community Park. It'll start at 9 a.m. each day and go until 2. And Saturday night, there'll be a barbecue and dancing. This is going to bring a long history of tradition and competition of different fire service companies coming together. They mustered together with local organizations and community leaders. We'll have our own muster team out there, our muster engine, and there'll be people there from Placer County, Nevada County, and Sac Metro. Of course, we'll have our own engine out there competing, so look forward to that. The single role paramedic academy of 15-2, they will be starting with 19 recruits on Monday morning. It's just a nonstop. One academy ends, another one starts, and that'll be in anticipation to backfill the single roles that'll be successful to move on to the firefighter academy in the fall. Save the date on the 27th of June for the Tropical Affair Gala for the Burn Institute. We've talked about that before. It's going to be at Shriners Hospital at 6 p.m. on the 27th, and it furthers the education of our area's burn doctors and nurses. It funds the annual kids camp, does prevention and information activities to the public, and assists with a new scald prevention program that they have underway. Again, the USGA Senior Open Golf Tournament will be going on the 22nd through the 28th at the Del Paso Country Club. Again, 20 million people are expected to, or $20 million is expected to come into the local economy. 130,000 people are expected to attend, and it'll be broadcast in 50 countries. And I probably messed something up there. I heard some chuckling. But
20 million people gave us all a bit of a lot.
did I say 20 million people? $20 million, yes. Be a big number. Fire camp again, July 7th through the 10th. We don't have any retirements to shout out about tonight because they really are not necessarily final, but in the last 2 days I've had the opportunity to say goodbye to BC Chris Seiler and firefighter Bob McDermott today. He's finishing his last shift, so we'll be talking about that more with service years, but a lot of guys that have gone through this organization giving great service in their last week of employment this week. I'd like to congratulate 18 of our employees out there who were successful in the fire captain's examination process. Obviously, the fire captain's job is extremely important, as all of them are, but congratulations to those 18 folks, and that list has been distributed. And that will conclude my report, unless you have any questions.
Any questions for the chief? Chief Shannon, operations report.
Hi, good evening, Board of Directors, Chief Wells, Brian Shannon, Operations Chief on the B shift. I'm here to report out the latest operations numbers. Since our last board meeting, we've had 3,891 total calls. I'll move this, Amanda. I don't want to start moving pictures up there. With that, we had 18 structure fires. We've had 25 wildland fires. Obviously, as we know, the heat is increasing and everything's drying out. We actually had 8 wildland fires last weekend alone. We currently have 2 employees that we actually deployed today on an overhead team, NorCal Team 2. They are traveling up to the Shasta Trinity as we speak for what they're calling the paddle fire, currently at about 900 acres. EMS side, we've had 2,916 dispatches with 2,082 transports for a 71.5 transport rate, which is down a little bit from the 72.9 from last board meeting. Our regional partner, AMR, had 14 dispatches with 9 transports for a 64.3 transport rate. Training, as always, the men and women of Metro Fire do a great job. They have logged 5,955 hours of training since the last board meeting. On our viewerships, our May viewership numbers were 1,819,302, which equates to a local market value of 155,347 or 155,347.52 cents. And lastly, just we'd like to thank Director Barnes. You were out at Station 51 on the 4th. It's a pretty unique situation out there. We have Sacramento City Engine 7 housed with our Engine 51 for, they're doing some improvements on Station 7, so they needed a home for a few weeks, which is actually a pretty good time to go. So from my understanding, you got the full service out there. I got to run some calls, hopefully good conversation. And looking forward to the C-Shift Station 50 personnel that you guys, I think you're visiting on June 18th. Good. End of report. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. Mr. O'Day, anything at this time?
No report tonight.
Local 522.
Hi, Ben, I couldn't be here, and he advised me that Chief Wells covered everything that we were going to talk about, so no report tonight.
Thank you so much, Captain. Committee and delegate reports. The Executive Committee, the next meeting is to be determined. Communication Center, JPA, Chief Holbrook.
Chair, the Communication Center, JPA, has not been since I last reported out. Our next meeting is the 30th.
The California Fire and Rescue Training, JPA, Director Kelly.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the JPA will meet again on the 18th, which is next Thursday at the Tech Center Drive location.
Thank you. The Finance and Audit Committee, Director Monk.
Finance and Audit Committee met this evening. We got a presentation from our CFO, Amanda Thomas, which was excellent. Still appreciate the detail that's included in all the reports we can get out of the Finance Division. It don't get the opinion that it puts us to sleep. The numbers are really great, and it gives us a true picture of where we are, and we appreciate that. Other than that, don't have a date for the next meeting. That's all I have.
If Director Scheidegger would tell you, were here, he would tell you that the next Policy Committee meeting will be June 25th, 2015 at 5 o'clock in these chambers. We're going to recess now to close session, and we will be back shortly.
I think he's being optimistic.